How's it, guys? Welcome back. Ready for chapter 12. Elephant culling. What happens to beast will happen to man. All things are connected. What befalls the earth befalls the sons of the earth. If the great beasts are gone, man will surely die of a lonely spirit. Chief Seattle of the Nez Perce. Okay. Guessing that's an American Indian. Chief Seattle. I'm rehydrating now. I'll have tea next time. This past year, Cyril, Mary Buns, and I have made many trips to the Zambezi to fish. We use fishing as an excuse, and we do go out and fish every day. But being in the bush is more of a balm. It's a time you hear stories you would never hear in town. It's a time to get down to the business of being friends. It's a time that I, as an uncle to Cyril's son, can teach him things his father cannot teach. I have had time to listen. I've also realized that if I had not lost my farm, I wouldn't have had this opportunity to be with my friends. Every day we go to a different part of the Zambezi to explore the fishing. Kenyan, Cyril's son, is 8 years old and a keen fisherman. I like to find a place by myself to fish. Probably because I'm not the best caster and I don't like to get lines tangled. Kenyan always seeks me out. Would it be a problem if I fished here next to you, Uncle Bill? Okay, I growl. We sit in silence and are pulling out the bream. The fishing is good, and when it's good, no one wants trouble. Kenyan snags his hook on a small reed. Bloody bastard, he mumbles. I pretend not to hear. Later on, one of his sinkers gets caught between two rocks and breaks off. Bloody bastard, he repeats. Now I've no idea where he ever heard that sort of talk, but I feel that as I am his uncle, I had to be a good influence on him. Kenyan, I have some advice for you. When we are fishing, it's quite alright to use words like bloody bastard. But when we are not fishing, it would be much better for your health and my health if you didn't use that kind of language. You got that? Well, that sounds reasonable, he replies. I then felt free to use expletives I had learned from Kenyan. And later on in Harare, I was reminded by Kenyan that we were not fishing when he heard me repeating what he had taught me at the river. We find some ilala palms and eat some of the outer fruit. It's extremely rough, and I mentioned to Cyril how I had eaten a lot of them this one time, and it had made me really constipated. It was then that Cyril told me how he and his Pikanin friends had got stuck in a load of prickly pears once, and that they had gotten all constipated. Cyril's mom sorted him out with liquid paraffin, but his little black friends were not so lucky. Cyril painted for me a vivid picture of a bare-bottomed little boy, bent over, and his friend picking away at a hard bolus of prickly pear seeds with a sharp stick. This tickled all of us so much that we giggled about that for days. It's not exactly what one could talk about at the Boral Brooks coffee shop with your friends. It's too noisy. There are too many people. Cell phones are ringing, business is booming. Only in the quietness of the Zambezi will you share an intimate experience like eating food that blocks the system. Yeah, it's like time stops, when you're out in the bush. You're in a different world. On the bank where our camp is situated is a large tin tub, a piece of hessian, and a capri bush giving privacy. Sunset is a marvelous time to sit in the tub, drink your wine, and solve the problems of the world. Mary Buns and I were both in the tub, the elephants coming down to drink, the hippos coming out of the water to graze, sand grouse jetting overhead, making their metallic calls on their way to the river, and pictures of elephant culls and Mario flash into my mind. No other animal has ever had so much controversy, research, emotion, love, or man-like behavior as the elephant. It is destructive. It is fascinating to watch. It is my favorite animal by far. and it needs lots of space. Researchers come up with detailed happenings in changing ecosystems due to the overcrowding of elephants, but none dare mention the word cull. Yeah, exactly. So this is actually something that I was recently thinking about the elephants in Wangi. I was recently there in August, and it's a beautiful park, huge park, but there are way too many elephants. There's about 40,000 elephants in a park that can only sustain 15 to 20,000 elephants, and they are doing some serious damage to the vegetation. Oh, check, he talks about it in the next sentence here. And this, I mean, keep in mind, this is like probably 15 years ago that this book was written. Oh, almost 20 years ago this book was written. And he's talking about it back then already. Imagine how much more worse it's now. I recently read a report done in Wangi of elephant damage, done by 3 Frenchmen, completed this year. It was well done and well presented, but the obvious solution to the problem was not mentioned once. Exactly. Researchers a long time ago came up with some arbitrary figure on how much land one elephant needs in order to survive. With a present population of 88,000 elephants, that's in the full country, the zoologists say that we have 40,000 too many. However, it wasn't always a sin to cull. The first documented elephant to move into the Victoria Falls area was in 1944. It was such an event that national parks came and shot it. At that time there were great herds of sable and eland, elephant and impala hardly ever being seen. Today, the riverine forests of the Zambezi have been destroyed on the Zimbabwe side, all the way from Kasangula to Kanyembe, due to the overpopulation of elephants. And instead of seeing nyala, sable and eland, you see baboons and impala. As the old hunters say, when you see too many impala, you know that you're in a bad area. National Parks did a big cull in Wangi in 1975. Willie Kuhn was in charge, and he expertly carried out the unsavory task. Babies were sold on tender, and all babies 48 inches at the shoulder or thereabouts were captured to be sold to zoos at a later stage. At the shoulder height of 48 inches, the baby has been weaned. The sparrows from Lone Star got the tender for the babies, and I was helping in the baby capture team. The first few babies were darted and then put in crates before given the antidote. From the field, they were taken to a large boma at Chibi. We found that the drugs put the babies into depression, some even dying. It was too much of a shock. It was a shock to me as well. The first baby I had to capture was sitting on its mother's trunk, pulling at her lifeless ear. I thought I was all alone and didn't hesitate to burst into tears. "Oh, pretty sad, isn't it?" Willie said behind me. "Don't feel bad. I did the same on my first cull." That's the problem. It's like, what would be better is getting money out of the elephants by having more hunting. And the best would be translocating them to other parks and or countries, selling them, but that costs money. And there's not that many that you can move. If you got half the population in a short amount of time, I don't think you can avoid culling. You do all the other stuff as well, but there's going to need some culling to be done. It's a necessary evil, the lesser of two evils, because if the elephant population continues to grow and swell and destroy the vegetation, then the whole, not just the elephants, but the whole ecosystem collapses, and the herbivores starve to death, and then the predators starve to death. So what's more humane of a death? I don't know. I'd say a bullet to the brain rather than weeks of starving. We discovered that if a team of 6 or 7 would run into the herd with capture nets, the babies did much better. In their fight for survival, it gave them confidence after losing their family. Every load of babies we would bring to the boma, they would be given an initiation of sorts by the other babies. As the babies would walk down the ramp, the others would smack it with their trunks and then start to push it all around the boma. This would carry on for about 5 minutes, and then the newcomer would join the rest as they welcomed the new baby. From this cull, 44 babies were taken and they were moved to Hawkins Farm in Nyamashlovu. I spent days watching and learning. Feeding was a problem, so it was decided to let out a few babies with the herdsman the first day and see what happened. It worked well, and pretty soon the whole herd of 44 was being let out every day to go grazing. Whenever I came up to the babies, and there had been an interval of time, they would go through the whole greeting with me. Then the trunks would start looking for goodies. I always carried horse cubes in my pockets, and they would fight to put their trunk in my pocket and get the cubes. Sweet. We also had many curious visitors. The babies knew all of us mostly by smell, and whenever a visitor would come around, the trunks would shoot out, the ears would come forward, and often a charge would ensue. So Humphrey Gibbs came for a visit one afternoon after the elephants were back in the stockade. If I remember correctly, I think Sir Humphrey Gibbs was somehow involved with the Rhodesian government. I think he was the British governor or the representative for Britain in the Rhodesian government. Somehow, he didn't hear me telling him to stay on the outside and came strolling into where the babies were. One of the larger babies made an aggressive charge. I leapt in her direction, grabbing onto her trunk. What does a 180-pound man do against a moving beast of 12 to 1500 pounds? I just hung on, talking to her, and she stopped just short of Sir Gibbs. It was not his only experience with baby elephants. He was visiting Lone Star once and made it in time for tea. Being the gentleman he is, he stood up when Dassie Sparrow came in with the tea tray and reached forward to relieve her of the tray. At that very moment, a baby elephant came running up behind Dassie and gave her a push with his trunk, knocking the whole tray of tea and cakes onto Sir Gibbs. On a cull done in the Gonorrhea National Park, one of the female babies had very short tusks already. She took umbrage at one of the keepers and proceeded to knock him down on his backside. Then she kneeled and put an extra hole in his backside. Knocked him down on his face. Then she kneeled and put an extra hole in his backside. From that moment on, they both had new names. The baby's elephant got the keeper's name, Vaseline, and the keeper got the name of Tu Nyovi, which means two you-know-what. I think that if I ever had to be involved with the shooting team, I would have done what Tommy Orford did. Even when he was instructed to keep the babies, they all ended up dead with their family. It was far kinder in the end. Mario was 12 years old, but had the body of an 8-year-old due to starvation. He had spent 3 months travelling through the bush from Mozambique to Zimbabwe. Frelimo had taken over as the political force in Mozambique, and as there was much resistance, Frelimo were wiping out whole villages, and in general creating havoc throughout the countryside. They had come to Mario's village, and from Mario's hiding place, he watched as the soldiers killed his parents and siblings. Travel during the day was out of the question, so Mario would lie up during the day in thick bush and travel during the night. He told me of meeting with elephants, lion and buffalo, but the worst was the hunger. He had come along the Sabi River and somehow ended up on Lone Star Ranch. The keepers of the baby elephants found him early one morning sleeping in the straw next to the elephant pens. Ray Sparrow owned Lone Star, and being a rancher, rises early every morning and keeps a finger on everything that goes on. On the morning of Mario's appearance, Ray sent for food. It was a pathetic sight to see the starved child with thin arms and legs, a head pinched, narrow, almost shriveled. He was fed 2 meals a day and in no time regained his health. It's a bit dangerous to give someone a lot of food after they've been starving for a while. It can actually kill them. But that happened at the liberation of the concentration camps in the Second World War. The US soldiers gave the starving concentration camp prisoners their rations. They were so hungry they ate and ate and ate, and then it just like the body just wasn't able to absorb it. I'm not sure exactly the science, but yeah, it's like it killed them. You know, it actually killed them, the food. So they had to be kept. The next camps that were liberated, they actually had to be kept in the camp to prevent them from going out and just getting food from the villagers. While doctors then administered them, gradual increase of food. Anyway. All Mario had for clothing was some tatters around his waist. Ray gave him a shirt, and this was his prized possession, which he wore only when it was cold or when guests came. He spent all of his time around the baby elephants, and by the second day was helping the keepers with their jobs. He learned how to water them, feed them, and clean out the pens. As he was a boy with no friends, the baby elephants soon became his friends. Excuse me. I would often see Mario sitting in the middle of a group of babies, playing with a trunk while the rest of them made wet lines on his dusty black body. Other times he would just lie on the back of one of the babies backwards, his arms folded, his head resting on the arms, fast asleep. It was about a month after arriving that Mario asked Ray for a job with the elephants. They spoke in Shangaan, and he assured Ray that he could do all the things the others did, even though he had a small body. Mario was hired and given a blanket at the same time. When I think of sheer joy, I always see the face of Mario when he got his blanket. And so it was that every morning you would see Mario leading the baby elephants out to graze in the veld, and at evening they would all come back to the pens. He knew the names of each of them and would talk to them in Shangaan all day. I have just looked up in my diary as to how many there were, but I had made no mention of it. But if my memory serves me right, there were over 20 babies, all controlled by this one small orphan. January of 82. There was a tremendous wind, with lightning and thunder. The baby elephants had already been taken out to graze. With no parents to settle them down, the babies panicked and took off away from the noise, taking them right to the Gonorrhea National Park. Right on their heels was Mario. When he lost sight of the elephants, he tracked them. That evening, there were no babies, so Jan Nordi was called to fly for them the following morning to try and find the babies. I flew with Jan, flying in large, lazy circles all through the Chihuahuas on the northern boundary of the park. I got so sick that Jan had to let me off at the Chipindi Pools airstrip, where Gondo picked me up, and we continued the search by vehicle. 2 days after the storm, Mario appeared back at Lone Star without the babies. He had followed them into other herds of elephants, and they chased him. He told of one cow chasing him, and as she was about to grab his fleeing body in her trunk, he fell into an antbear hole, and she ran right over the top of him. He asked if he could take some horse cubes and go back, assuring Ray that he would be able to bring them all back. The following day, Mario found the tracks of the babies, all coming back across from the park into Lone Star. A while later, he caught up with the babies, and he fed them all horse cubes during their reunion. But 4 of the smallest were missing. In spite of 4 missing, it was a triumphal entry that evening back to headquarters. And from what I hear, Mario has been working with game ever since. I'm sitting here in my chalet at the Sakumi Tree Lodge, as a tourist once more. In camp with us is Henk Rottenbeck and his wife from Holland. Oddly enough, I met them here on Buck de Vries Ranch about 12 years ago, when they were here for a year. He's a wildlife photographer and a photojournalist, having just put out a pictorial book on the aardwolf. A good part of the time Henk spent in Zimbabwe was spent with the captured baby elephants that Buck had on his farm. During this time, the only aftershave you could get was fresh up, and Henk would put us on every day. He got to know the babies well, would feed them horse cubes, pellets made of molasses, crushed grass and grain. Visiting them every day was almost a ritual for Henk. Recently, before leaving Holland, Henk was assigned by the newspaper company he works for to go and take photos of a Russian circus that had come to Amsterdam. And the elephants were standing out in the snow. When he arrived, the owner asked Henk what he wanted, and refused him permission to take photos of the animals. Henk is a big man. In fact, he reminds me of those grizzly bears. Henk and the owner started to have words when 2 elephants came to the tented area. The trainer was trying to hold them back, and the trainer and the owner were shouting to Henk to leave before the elephants got there. Henk asked them if these elephants were from Zimbabwe, and particularly from Buck de Vries Ranch. There was no time for an answer. The 2 elephants were towering over Henk, smelling every bit of him and rumbling their greeting. Stranger thing was, admitted Henk, I woke up with a headache that day and decided I woke up with a headache that morning and decided that day to use the old Fresh Up deodorant from Zimbabwe, which could also have something to do with them recognizing me. I got goosebumps just listening to the story. Alright, there we go. Thanks for listening. Hope you sleep well. See you next time. Cheers.